Right now, somewhere in your refrigerator, there is almost certainly a container of something you cooked 2 or 3 nights ago. It looks exactly the way it did the night you made it. Same color, same smell, nothing about it seems different. But something has been happening inside that container since the moment you sealed the lid. A slow, invisible chemistry experiment running in the dark of your fridge with no witnesses and no smell to give it away. By the time you reheat it tonight, what lands on your plate is not at the molecular level the same food you cooked the first time. And the test almost all of us use to decide whether it's fine, does it look okay, does it smell okay, is it hot enough, has almost nothing to do with the changes that actually matter. I'm Dr. Carmen Keith, and for years now I've been fascinated by the gap between what the research on food chemistry actually says and what ends up on our dinner tables. Not because anyone's lying to you, because almost nobody's translating it. So today I want to walk you through 5 foods that a huge number of us reheat without a second thought. Foods that, under the wrong storage and reheating conditions, undergo real, measurable chemical changes, not urban legend changes, the kind you'd find described in peer-reviewed literature if you went looking. And I want to be upfront about something before we go further because it matters. This isn't a video about panic. Nobody develops cancer because they microwaved leftover rice one Tuesday. What we're talking about is pattern and exposure. Small chemical shifts that, repeated over months and years, are the kind of thing researchers increasingly think matter for long-term risk. Cancer is almost never one bad decision. It's usually the sum of thousands of small ones, most of them invisible. So think of this less as a warning and more as an edit to a habit you didn't know needed editing. Let's start with the belief most of us are operating under, because it's the whole reason this topic stays hidden. We assume that heat is the great equalizer, that if something gets hot enough, whatever was wrong with it gets fixed. Burn off the bacteria, kill the germs, done. That belief is true for some things and dangerously incomplete for others. Heat can kill a microorganism. It often can't undo the chemical changes that microorganism or oxygen or time already set in motion. Reheating something doesn't reset its molecular clock. Sometimes it fast-forwards it. Let's go inside the food itself for a second, because this is where the actual story lives. When you cook something the first time, proteins unfold, sugars caramelize, fats begin to interact with oxygen. Normal, expected, part of what makes food taste like food. But once that dish goes into the fridge, sits there overnight or for a few days, and then meets heat a second time, 3 different chemical pathways tend to kick in, depending on what's on the plate. Fats and proteins that have already started oxidizing break down further into compounds that many researchers now flag as capable of interacting with our DNA. Sugars and proteins exposed to high heat repeatedly can form advanced glycation end products, the same family of compounds tied to chronic inflammation. And in certain nitrate-rich foods, bacteria quietly convert those nitrates into nitrites during storage, which heat can then push toward nitrosamine formation, a group of compounds with a well-documented carcinogenic profile in the research literature. Hold on to those 3 ideas: oxidation, glycation, nitrosamine formation. You'll see them show up again and again as we go through this list. Food 1 is rice. And it's the one almost none of us think twice about, because rice feels indestructible. It isn't the reheating itself that's the main issue here. It's what happens in the hours between the first cooking and the second. Raw rice naturally carries a bacterium called Bacillus cereus. Cooking doesn't reliably wipe it out, and once rice cools slowly on the counter or sits in the fridge for an extended stretch, that bacterium can multiply and release a heat-stable toxin. Heat-stable is the key phrase. Reheating kills the bacteria. It does nothing to the toxin they already produced. Lab research has linked that toxin to mitochondrial stress in human cells, and mitochondrial dysfunction is one of the early biological events some researchers connect to abnormal cell behavior down the line. On top of that, repeatedly heating starchy food increases acrylamide formation, a compound the International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies as probably carcinogenic to humans. The fix isn't complicated. Cool rice quickly, refrigerate it fast, eat it within a day, and don't reheat the same batch twice. Food 2 is chicken, and this is the one that tends to catch health-conscious people off guard because chicken has this reputation as the safe, virtuous protein. Think of the person who preps a big tray of chicken and rice every Sunday night, portions it into containers, and works through it methodically all week. Proud, honestly, of how organized and healthy that habit looks from the outside. Reheat that same chicken breast at high heat, though, and the proteins undergo oxidation that can generate heterocyclic amines, compounds that show up consistently in dietary carcinogen research, not as some fringe theory, but as one of the more studied classes of compounds in this space. Once those compounds are metabolized in the liver, they become reactive enough to bind to DNA directly, and research increasingly points to that kind of binding as a contributor to the mutations that can eventually push a normal cell toward abnormal growth. There's also a subtler issue. As chicken reheats, its fats undergo lipid oxidation, producing byproducts linked to cellular stress. None of this means chicken is dangerous. It means the second trip through high heat is where the real chemistry happens, and it's worth eating leftover chicken cold in a salad or wrap more often than you'd think. Food 3 is spinach, and honestly, this is the one that made me sit with my own habits for a minute, because spinach is supposed to be the good guy. It's the vegetable every cardiologist and oncologist tells you to eat more of, and they're right to say that, fresh or cooked and eaten right away. The trouble starts in storage. Spinach, along with beets, celery, and Swiss chard, carries naturally occurring nitrates that are genuinely good for cardiovascular health in their original form. But once cooked spinach sits in the fridge, bacteria on the leaves start converting those nitrates into nitrites. The same conversion process behind why processed meat carries the carcinogen classification it does. Reheat spinach that's been sitting for a day or more, and you're applying heat to a vegetable already partway down the nitrosamine pathway. The European Food Safety Authority has issued formal guidance flagging exactly this concern around nitrate-rich vegetables and reheating. It's a strange kind of irony. One of the healthiest foods on the planet turned into a liability by nothing more than a storage habit. If you're going to keep cooked greens, eat them cold within a few hours instead of reheating them later. Food 4 is eggs, and this is usually the one that surprises people the most because eggs feel like the last food anyone would flag. They're nutritionally about as complete as food gets. All 9 essential amino acids, choline for brain function, antioxidants that protect your eyes. None of that changes. What changes is the fat in the yolk. When an egg cooks the first time, that fat begins an initial, expected round of oxidation. Refrigerate the egg, then reheat it at high temperature, and that oxidation accelerates, producing byproducts including oxysterols, oxidized forms of cholesterol that a number of toxicology reviews describe as having inflammatory and, in some study models, genotoxic properties. Genotoxic is the word that matters here. It means capable of damaging genetic material, which is generally the first domino in the sequence researchers associate with abnormal cell growth. There's a second, quieter issue too. The sulfur-containing amino acids in eggs can degrade under repeated heat, and some research suggests that degradation may add oxidative stress to the digestive tract's lining, an area of ongoing interest in colorectal cancer research. The practical version of this: eat eggs fresh when you can, store hard-boiled eggs in the shell, and eat them cold, and skip the microwave for reheating scrambled eggs or omelets. And now, the fifth one, the one that almost never comes up in these conversations, because it hides behind its own healthy reputation even more than eggs do: fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, tuna, the fish we're told to eat more of for the omega-3s. Those same omega-3 fatty acids are polyunsaturated, which makes them chemically active and, frankly, fragile. The first time you cook fish, some of that fat begins to oxidize, same as with the egg yolk. Refrigerate the leftovers, then reheat that fish, especially in a microwave, especially at high power, and the oxidation accelerates fast, generating aldehydes like 4-hydroxynonenal, compounds that toxicology researchers have studied for their capacity to interact with proteins and DNA inside cells. This is part of why reheated fish so often tastes and smells different from the first time around. That shift in flavor is, in a very real sense, the smell of the fat breaking down. Some researchers have also raised concerns about trimethylamine buildup during storage of fish, which intensifies with a second round of heat. None of this means you should stop eating fish. The opposite, honestly. Fresh fish remains one of the better protein choices out there. It means leftover fish is one of the better candidates to eat cold the next day, in something like a salad, rather than running it through the microwave. Think back to that container sitting in the fridge right now, the one that looks exactly like it did the night it went in. Nothing dramatic is happening to it. That's actually the point. The changes we've walked through today don't announce themselves. A few months after I first started digging into this research myself, I changed exactly one habit in my own kitchen. I stopped cooking in batches meant to last 5 or 6 days and started cooking smaller amounts more often, eating the extra cold when I could instead of running it through the microwave a second and third time. It wasn't a hard change. It didn't cost anything. It just required knowing there was something worth changing in the first place. So if you're standing in your kitchen tonight looking at containers of rice, chicken, spinach, eggs, or fish, here's the thinking I'd actually use, not as a checklist, but as a way of deciding in the moment. Ask whether this needs a second trip through high heat at all. A lot of what we reheat out of habit tastes just as good, sometimes better, cold or at room temperature. If it does need heat, go gentler and lower than you'd think. Because a lot of the chemistry we've talked about today accelerates specifically at high, fast heat, which is exactly what a microwave on full power delivers. Cool things quickly after cooking instead of letting them sit out, because that window of slow cooling is where a surprising amount of the bacterial and chemical trouble actually begins. And maybe most usefully, cook a little less at a time. Fewer days of storage means fewer opportunities for any of these pathways, oxidation, glycation, that nitrate to nitrite to nitrosamine chain, to get very far along before the food is gone. None of this is about fear, and it's definitely not about throwing out your leftovers tonight in a panic. It's about updating a mental model a lot of us inherited without ever examining it. The idea that hot equals safe, full stop. The research doesn't say leftovers are dangerous. It says the relationship between heat, time, and chemistry is more complicated than just heat it through. And that complexity has been sitting in scientific journals for years, waiting for someone to translate it into something you can actually use standing at your own stove. If any of this intersects with a health condition you're already managing, it's always worth bringing up with your own doctor or dietitian who can weigh it against your specific situation in a way a video never can. That container is probably still sitting in your fridge right now. You don't need to throw it out tonight. You just need to look at it a little differently the next time you reach for it. Not as a food that's simply on or off, safe or spoiled, but as something quietly in motion, chemically speaking, from the moment it was made. Small edit, no drama. That's usually how the useful changes actually look. Not a dramatic before and after, just a slightly different decision made quietly the next time the microwave door swings open. Thank you for watching.